Coming up on this episode of Nothing to Bring.
We find out about DC Bradshaw's Kickstarter for Little But Fierce, the board games that we like, and we talk about the role of AI in marking. We also briefly discuss the challenges of digital exams.
I'm Matt Morris.
I'm Sarah Johnson.
And we
have
nothing
to bring.
Right, I don't know if you've noticed, but that gets slower and slower every week.
But yet still not in time, which I like.
No, never, because we get slower and slower and wait for each other to say the next bit. So next time we record, let's just do an hour of that. Right,
I don't want to do an hour.
Really slow.
I don't want to do an hour of just trying to say one thing in time together.
Okay, we'll not.
And
do
also, that won't be interesting for our listeners. But I tell you what will be interesting for our listeners is we have a special guest today.
We do indeed.
Would you like to introduce yourself, young man?
It feels weird being called young man, but sure, why not? Good evening, morning, whatever time you're watching this. My name's Dave Bradshaw, or DC Bradshaw, depending on what you want to call me. I probably shouldn't leave that one open. But yeah, thank you very much for having me on as a guest. Words, Dave.
Maths, science.
Yeah.
You know what? I've never asked you what DC stands for.
I must have told you, surely.
No, you haven't told me, so I don't know.
Okay, David Charles.
I might know that, actually.
Yeah.
I think I've discovered that.
So this is a bit unique, two ways this time. So obviously our first episode
Just
with a
to
guest.
say,
And
you can't have bit unique. It's either unique or not. There's no gradients in unique.
You've gone full Jed Bartlett, haven't you? Yeah, it can't be very unique.
It can't be very unique. It's either unique
Sam
or not
Seaborn,
unique.
bring him in, sort this out.
Sorry.
So this is a unique episode of the Nothing to Bring podcast for three reasons, in fact. One of them is that Sarah just wants to interrupt and correct everything I say. But the actual two reasons are we've got Dave with us today and I'm on tour. So here I am in a hotel room in Manchester, which has taken me about an hour to set up. It's got poor lighting, but we're going to roll with it and see where we get.
You look ominous.
There is, I think if we went a little bit further and then we just did like a weird voice mask, it's like you're being interviewed on the news.
Okay.
This mysterious man has chosen not to reveal his identity.
He's anonymous for now.
So I'll tell you this part. So lighted, this is only a bit of the room where there's a bit of lighting above me that I can light myself with. So I've tried to move all of these lamps, okay? They all have a different type of plug on them that doesn't fit any other socket in this room. And that one over there, which would have been the best one to put here and maybe provide some light, the wire goes through the wall. So I'm not sure where that goes. So I have tried to move things around, but this is the best I can do. Been better, but yeah, unfortunately, they didn't think about podcasters when they set this room up.
It's
Why
like
would
they don't
they?
actually care about us.
We need a Gov UK petition to make sure that all hotel rooms have sensible wiring, a plug by the bed for your phone.
Thank you.
Yeah, none
What
of
is
this nonsense.
What is it about not having a plug by the bed? Because I want my phone on the other side of the room, especially when it's an alarm and things like that.
You also have some that hate people who use Macs. So I have a MacBook, which I take, but it's got a big honking plug on it that's quite tall.
Yep.
And sometimes you can't plug it in at the desk. Absolute pain. First world problems. Absolutely first world, middle class problem.
Yeah. So one of the things that we normally do on the podcast, DC Bradshaw, is we say how our week has been. So I wonder, well, Matt's sitting in a hotel, so you're probably feeling lonesome because it's always a bit weird staying in a hotel.
No, it's been a good day. I'm at an event. It's an education event. It runs for 2 days. It's completely paid for as well, which is always lovely. The hotel room paid for, the food's all paid for, the event itself, because it's funded by the different businesses who come to promote their wares to different educators, and it's a fun event. We had some really great speakers today, so it's been quite nice. But it's not been one of those kind of geeky weeks. I don't think it's been a very, very busy week at work. I did finish my Lego Soundwave, so my third Lego Transformer, and I would have had it here had I not brought so many bags with me to Manchester that I couldn't actually carry them all in one go and had to trek about a mile back to the car to get the rest. So I'll save that one for next time. But I did finish it, and it was I did something unique to me. It's unique again. Got to stop having unique things, otherwise it won't be unique. But I did something unusual for me, which is normally I spend the evening sort of film and TV or video gaming, and I didn't. I sat and I sort of late at night built Lego, which I found more relaxing than doing it in the daytime with other people around, because I often do it with the kids and that's great fun, but I found that on my own sort of day and night, just building the Lego, really relaxing. So I'm gonna do that. I mean, I've got the Goonies set to build, which could take a very, very long time, so maybe if I do it evenings a little bit at a time.
Presumably it kind of goes into that sort of meditation kind of, my brain is doing a very methodical task, and then other bits of it can just kind of be whirring in the background. You know, some people say that about like folding laundry. I hate doing anything related to laundry.
No.
But yeah, one of those things where it's like, right, my brain can just do it, away we go. So yeah.
Absolutely. It felt very rewarding. What about you, Sarah?
So this week has been relatively busy. Been also staying in hotel rooms, which always feels incredibly lonely and miserable. And I also find whenever I'm in a hotel room, I get ravenous, really, really hungry, like I might never eat again because I can't just go into a kitchen. And so I've been ravenous in various different hotel rooms across the country. But I went to Youth Sports Trust Awards, which was really good. Saw Kath Kitchen, which is always wonderful. And for those that don't know Kath Kitchen, she is the chair of the National Association for Hospital Education, so kind of the equivalent of PRUSAP, but for hospital education. So spent a lot of time with her and Steve Howe, who's one of the exec members for PRUSAP. I've also had the proof copy of Little Mouse and the Sun, which is quite good. So that's really exciting. And I know DC Bradshaw is going to read it for me for our channel as well, which I'm very excited by.
Superb.
Yeah, just work, but visiting SCMH schools up and down the country, so social, emotional, mental health schools, and doing school improvement work. So I wouldn't say particularly exciting. Oh, I've been teaching women teachers in Kazakhstan as well online. That was quite good.
That's pretty exciting.
That was really random, wasn't it? And Kazakh teachers.
Not very exciting. Oh yeah, and also doing some remote teaching in Kazakhstan.
Yeah. And diving into pedagogy, which I don't do as much as I normally talk about social, emotional, mental health. So to talk about, what is teaching and adaptive teaching, and what is differentiation, and what does it mean for your practice? Yeah. How about you, DC Bradshaw? You have had an exciting week.
I mean, I have. I've had a very busy week for a number of reasons. I will say, the first bit was actually kind of similar to you both. I realized in my introduction, I didn't actually say why I'm here. I haven't just gate crashed your podcast.
You had. You just found the link.
Yeah, just kind of rocked up. So I was a teacher. I'm now in Edtech. The exciting world of education technology. So I've been gallivanting quite a lot in the last couple of weeks. It was relatively quiet just after Christmas, and then I've been up and down the country. I've been in Leeds and London, and today I've just come back from Sheffield. Exciting, the most glamorous parts of the UK. But it's been all right. I will say before I get onto the latest thing, one part of my gallivanting was very, very fun because I was actually in Derbyshire the other day, doing something for my 40th birthday. I mean, my 40th birthday was back in August, but my wife bought me a very cool present, which was to do a day of blacksmithing at Peak Blacksmithing in Bakewell. And I made a bottle opener. It's very, very cool. It is absolutely exhausting. It is one of those things that sounds an awful lot of fun, and it was, but good grief, I am very unfit. Yeah, so my arm was just like hammering and hammering and hammering, for the entire day. And it's like, and this was building a bottle opener. They did like a 2-day course, which was building an axe, which sounds very fun. But it's like my arm turned to jelly after doing a bottle opener. I'm not sure I can do an axe yet. I'm going to have to do some sort of gladiator style training montage, and then I can come and do an axe another time. But absolutely great, really good. And I feel internally, I say the geeky part of my brain, that's most of my brain, but I'm imagining like my Skyrim skills going up. I've increased blacksmithing, so in the event of post-apocalyptic or a fantasy RPG setting, I have a tiny bit of a skill.
You're like plus five blacksmithing now.
Plus 5, I think, maybe a stretch. Maybe like about 1.5.
Oh, okay, yeah. But I mean, it must be truly exhausting because, as you were talking about, I'm thinking, I'm wondering what a sword would take to. Yeah. I mean, and then you said axe.
I asked the lady, whose name is Jess. She's been doing it for something like 20 years or something like that. And I did ask her, I said, I see you do an axe thing. How long would it take to make a sword? And she said, there are some people out there who claim you can do it in like, a day or two, but not particularly well. But realistically, it'd be like a week's worth of work and probably multiple people doing it. There were some bits on just doing the corkscrew where I was there with my dad doing it, and you had to do the bits in pairs where one person has to hold it, and then one person strikes, and then someone else strikes it with a sledgehammer kind of on the offbeat. And there's more and more of that kind of stuff, I think, if you're building a sword. Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to do it, but I need to, be swole.
I taught my husband sword making as well for blacksmithing sword. but we're doing it as a couple. So both.
Yeah, when you say you bought your husband it, did you buy yourself it and have
No.
invited your husband along?
No, the idea of blacksmithing, for those that don't know me, I'm 5'1" and 7.5 stone. I'm not made for blacksmithing at all. Like, it's not like I'm going to be awful at it. I've got no endurance. My constitution is poor. So it's definitely for my husband because I thought he would like it. And, he's a big guy. So I feel like he would be better at it than, I don't think small women are necessarily made for blacksmithing. That might be really controversial now.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, I think yes, possibly.
The lady who, there's a Jess who runs Peak Blacksmithing. Not that tall. Yeah, I think
enough.
I think maybe it's like a training thing.
Yeah, maybe.
You've got to train certain muscles that you don't tend to use in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. No, fair enough. So how else has your week been, DC Bradshaw?
So this week I did something that was kind of been like 4 years in the making, more or less. So I launched my first Kickstarter this week at the time of recording 2 days ago, which is something I've been working towards. So for those who aren't familiar with Kickstarter, it's one of these things where I think a lot of people know exactly what it is, and some people have absolutely no concept of what it is. I'll do the kind of... this is the short version of what a Kickstarter is. So for those who are not familiar with it, Kickstarter is an online platform where you can kind of crowdfund is the term. So people pay money to help you achieve something. Generally making something creative. In my case, it's a game. Some people do it to fund, their first novel. Some people do it to, all sorts of stuff. I think, especially if you like very geeky tech stuff, there's an awful lot of geeky tech stuff on Kickstarter. And it is dangerous. Once you get on that bandwagon, you start backing everything. But the idea is it's a way to get that kind of initial bit of money to do the thing that you want to do. And they will generally get a reward out of it. So that, if it's a case of, well, you're funding my game, that means you get a copy of the game at the end. And obviously that money goes towards all that stuff, which, unless you have just got some ridiculous inheritance or something like that, or, a very rich uncle or something like that, most people can't afford to do stuff without some funding in order to do it. So that's the general idea of what Kickstarter is. So mine is a game. One of my particular brands of geekiness is tabletop role-playing games. So D&D being kind of the classic example of it, which has been discussed on the podcast before. So my game is called Little But Fierce, and yes, I stole that from Shakespeare, because if you're going to steal from the best. And it is basically a rewrite of... Now, legally speaking, I need to be very careful on this one. It is a rewrite of the rule set that is used to make Dungeons & Dragons. Legally speaking, it is not a rewrite of Dungeons & Dragons, otherwise Wizards of the Coast lawyers will get very angry with me. But no, it is an adaptation of that rule set, that D&D rule set, to make it accessible for kids. I say kids as young as 6, or frankly... anyone who just likes something a bit less crunchy, because for anyone who has, when they were younger or as an adult, try to learn like a modern, what we call Euro style board game, something like Settlers of Catan or something like Ticket to Ride or something like that. Some people get very, very intimidated by rule books, and they see something with more than 2 pages of rules and go, no, I'm not doing it. And even more so for things like a role-playing game. So my concept was something that kids could read and play and enjoy without having to have an adult paraphrase it for them, but also just people who, whether it's people with special educational needs or just people who fancy something, just like I said, a bit less crunchy, they can pick up something and have a D&D type experience. But yeah, I started 4 years ago when my daughter was 2. And now she is just about the right age for actually playing it. So I really hope it actually funds. That would be good.
I've just got it on my screen now. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that we add down below the Kickstarter link as well for you. But at the moment, it's been day and a half, I think you've been, was it 2 days now?
Yeah. What time is it right now? So it's 9 o'clock right now. So it's been going for a little over 48 hours now. We've got a way to go because making anything like this is really expensive. And it's one of those things where I'm a spreadsheet guy. I was a maths teacher. I was a computer science teacher as well. So I love me a good spreadsheet. And it's one of these things where you start putting stuff in and you say, well, I want to do this really, really well. And then the costs skyrocket. And then you go, well, can I pull back on stuff without impinging quality? But it turns out professional artists and professional editors cost a lot of money, but rightly so, because they're very awesome. So, I'm happy to pay them the money. Does mean I need to raise more in order to actually fund it, though. And it is one of those all or nothing things. You either get to your goal and get to make the thing, or you don't get to the goal, no one gets charged, but you don't get any money for it.
And at the moment, you can pledge £10 and that's no reward just because it speaks to you. So what I'll probably do is the hardback edition code and digital PDF for £45. You can get the digital PDF hardback edition code, but you can also do a special thing where you have your child immortalised essentially as one of the characters. But I wouldn't be able to choose between my children, so I'm not going to do that because I'd only be able to do it for one child. And then, who do I choose? Like, do I choose my favourite child or my least favourite child? It's difficult, isn't it?
Well, two of them are twins, so they wouldn't know which one it was actually based on.
Yeah, I did think that. I actually had that whole thought process, but they have different coloured glasses, so they would know.
You described one of my pet peeves just a moment ago, Dave, which was that I wouldn't say I'm a big board game. I want to be. I've got children who are now of an age where we're starting to get into more complex games. But again, not them necessarily, but other people just don't want, unless it's a simple roll of dice and it's all based on luck and you move around a board so many spaces, people just don't want to understand the rules or anything. And you mentioned Ticket to Ride, which actually I think is, whilst at first might seem intimidating, actually really straightforward. It is a really good kind of entry level into a very different way of playing a board game. But it infuriates me when people just will not get past that kind of, and it's basically games which are, it's the difference between strategy and luck, isn't it, in some ways? A lot of those luck-based games, which are just dice rolls, they're all the same principle. My biggest issue with board games are not real board games. They're the big clunky plastic things that are really, really cheap that masquerade as a board game. So
the sort of thing you might see in the Works for very cheap, which is
the Works or B&M that you can buy 2 for £20. There's like one where it's a dog doing a poo, and we've got one which is, it's a couch that swallows money. And I dislike all these things because I think they dumb down the idea of playing games.
So like Hungry Hippos and things like that.
I think
they're classics though, aren't they? Some of those.
I think that is a thing now that, that actually there are a lot of very, very good board games out there, and there are some which are just ludicrous. Really, You've got to be absolutely in for it, and it has to be the sort of thing where you can carve out 5 hours to play it, and make sure your kids are at relatives or something like that, which that's quite extreme. But actually I think there are an awful lot of games that are relatively accessible, with things like Ticket to Ride being a classic example. You mentioned the thing about the rules. I'll give you 2 anecdotes on this one. So my wife has ADHD, and it's very much a thing. If I'm introducing her to a new board game, I basically have a very short window to either get her hooked enough that she'll listen to the explanation, or I have to get enough of an explanation of the rules so that we can start playing within a short amount of time before she kind of wanders off, literally or figuratively. But on Ticket to Ride, I can't remember how long we'd been dating. I mean, this was a while ago. We've been married almost 10 years now. But I do remember relatively early on, I suggested that we play Ticket to Ride, and she recalls this as, and Dave suggested that we play a train game. And I thought, that's it. We had a good run, but no, that's it. It's over. And then she bloody loved it. And it's one of those games where she gets incredibly competitive. There is a risk that the entire board is going to get flipped over and trains everywhere if it goes badly. But it's a good game. It's
a really good entry-level strategy game because, and I've played it with my children, and what they learnt very quickly with it was, you've got to be thinking a couple of moves ahead here, because if he puts his train there, I've got to go there. And I was looking at that line. And so they've learnt really quickly about thinking ahead and planning multiple moves. I think that's a really good entry level to the more complex games.
There is, and most of those, especially the ones that have been around for a while, like Ticket to Ride, they have produced actually kid versions of them as well.
Yeah.
So I've introduced our daughter. We've got a bunch of them. So a lot of them are either called My First or, or similar sorts of names. So we've got the equivalent for Ticket to Ride and Stone Age.
I think it's First Journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ticket to Ride,
Settlers of Catan, that's brilliant. It's got pirates in it and it's just awesome. Super. It's so much fun. And some of them are very, very simple, and some of them are approaching the complexity of the main version of the game, but just not quite as much. It's a nice way, again, as you say, to guide them through something that's a bit more exciting than Snakes and Ladders, and has got a bit more strategy and builds the way of thinking about how to think a couple of turns ahead and stuff like that. So actually we can start getting into something that's a game not specifically designed for kids, because she's used to the sort of way of playing those sorts of games.
So a really great entry level kind of strategy-esque game that we got at Christmas. So I've gone into this tradition of Christmas Eve. There are board games that everyone's allowed to open, and so we will then play those board games. And my children are very much into Bunny versus Monkey and some of these sort of books, the Phoenix comic types books, Flember and all these other things. So there is a book based on a lot of those characters, things based on the Bunny versus Monkey kind of universe of characters. And it's called Hero Slam. And it's a kind of card-based game that just uses unique, funny characters. And it's all about point scoring based on the characters you've got. And you can fight other players using your cards. So it takes a little bit of the strategy as an entry level to those strategy games and combines it with a little bit of top trumps, and it's a really good sort of. So my 8-year-old absolutely hooked on it. We had to play it about 6 times between Christmas Eve and Boxing Day, just because the characters are funny, the kind of conversations you are having are really funny. You are kind of egging each other on because it's about turning over cards, and if you turn over too many cards, you might end up losing the cards you've picked because it's a higher lower kind of approach. So it becomes a really funny kind of back and forth. The other one is called 13 Beavers. I don't know if you've heard of 13 Beavers. And again, it's based on kind of, do I make that decision or don't I make that decision? So you have a beaver who moves around, and if you kind of go higher or lower on a card-based system and you get it right, you keep moving around the board, and then you move when you decide that's it. I've kind of run out of luck here. Your lodge moves up and meets you where you are as a beaver, and you're safe. But if you kind of move around the board and you get the higher lower wrong, you end up going all the way back to your lodge. So again, a really good entry to thinking forward, luck. When does my luck run out?
I think that particular thing you described, the kind of the press your luck style mechanic is really, I mean, there are some great games like that. And also I think in terms of, not being terribly pretentious on this one, but if you want to sneak a little bit of education into this, actually that is something that's quite hard for kids to grasp. I'm choosing to stop rather than say more. There's a great game that we got for our little one called Stomp the Plank, which is wonderful. It's brilliant. You turn the box over and it's a pirate ship, and you've got little magnetic planks that go off the side of it, and you've got little elephants that are walking across the plank, and you've got to try and turn over cards, and if you get a duplicate, then you're bust, essentially. So you've got to see how many cards you can get before you get a duplicate. And if you fail, you've got to move your elephant out, and eventually they'll topple over. So that whole mechanic of actually, you're doing really well, you've got a good score, stop, rather than going more. And that's it. It's not an obvious lesson, and it is important that they kind of grasp that kind of tactical, right, rather than just going full steam ahead all the time. But there's some really great games out there that, a lot of fun for the family. And there were some little bits of lessons and strategy in there as well, which is always nice.
Yeah, it's excellent. I'm gonna pick up on something you said earlier on, Sarah, and I've waited about 15-20 minutes there. Now you mentioned that Dave's going to read your book.
Yes, Little Mouse and the Sun.
Are you said for this channel?
Yes.
Now last time out, you know where I'm going with this, don't you? Because last time out, you said to me I wasn't allowed to make content for this channel. And then somebody in the comments said, no, Matt, you should actually definitely make that.
And so that's why I've changed my mind, because everyone said, no, we want to see unboxing videos. You know what? I'm going to have loads of complaints about how I change my mind about things, because people get really angry if I change my mind and get convinced by things. And especially if I mention the word Star Trek, then people get really angry if I change my mind. No, but if you're happy to use the channel in that way, I was going to get Dave to read my story. And should I explain why I want Dave to read my story as well? So Dave and I met, I don't know how long we've known each other. Has it been about a year?
Maybe a little bit more, I think. Yeah, time is a weird soup, I'm not sure.
So Dave and I play Dungeons and Dragons together fortnightly, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. And we get really excited when I think we as the whole group get really excited because Dave does voices for D&D. And so we get really, really excited. I'm like, do the voices, Dave, do the voices. And sometimes Dave is the dungeons master, so he's essentially the storyteller. And sometimes he is a character. At the moment, we have a different storyteller who is going to be on the channel at some point, Carl, and we are both characters. And also, Dave is kind enough to give me hints and tips sometimes in messages or chat when I don't know what my spells do.
Sometimes send abuse to try and catch you off your guard.
Yeah, and then what's
affectionately
worse about it? You're not the only person that messages me during the game. And So Dave Dydale sometimes messages me and then grasses me up and says that I'm distracted because I'm texting him. It's like, you text me. So and then James Hanscom tells us off. I mean, James tells us off. It's great.
I mean, Carl was the one who introduced me to this wonderful group of people. Carl and I followed each other on, I think, originally Twitter before it turned into a bin fire. And
we'd all agree on that here. Yeah, absolutely. No.
And then I think some people had to leave this wonderful little secret group, this cabal. And Carl was like, do you want to join in? You know, these group of people who either still teachers or are now education consultants or, you know, in one case, a head teacher. A wonderful group of people, you know, because I had at that time, I'd probably been 5-6 years out of the classroom. So I was still in the education sector doing Edtech stuff, but I wasn't actually talking to, you know, other than my wife, you know, people who were still teaching. So it was really nice to kind of get back into that world, you know, not that we talk shop that often, but I have bumped into, you know, people I, for a long time, had only met virtually at actual education events now, which is quite lovely.
I think I just invited myself around your house.
That has happened.
Because you were halfway between where I could use the toilet.
Yes.
That's always helpful.
Like, I've just got into Essex. Like where do you live?
Yeah, I need the loo and a cup of tea, and I don't want to go into a service station. Yeah. Well, because I travel around England, it's nice to know people in different areas so you can go and meet them. So I used to play. So I didn't join their group for D until later. I had the original D&D group with David Dydale and Richard Clutterbuck. That game kind of stopped because people got really busy, and then somehow I infiltrated your group because I was desperate to play. I think I just put on a shout out, like, will someone be my friend for D&D? I think probably something along those lines. I hadn't met most of the group either until...
No, I think the first game I played, I think there were generally a lot of introductions because there were some people who had remained in that group, who had got through the culling or whatever had happened behind the scenes, hadn't been put out to pasture. But yeah, I think the pair of us and maybe someone else, I think, maybe hadn't been part of the group before.
Yeah, David Dydale wasn't part of the group.
No, I think so. No, I think that because I can remember that minute. I remember you messaging and saying, "Can David do it?" And then Carl messaged me and said, like, do you know who David Dydale is? And it's like, I've heard the name. I think I wasn't an English teacher. Ask your wife and say you're going to play D&D with David Dydale. And then she got very, very excited by this.
I am terrified of the idea of playing D&D though. For some of the things you've just, there's this kind of, in my head, there's a kind of a clique mentality, which may or may not be true. And you talked about the way
if you don't like people,
Yeah. So you talked there about the groups that you were part of and how those groups had formed and things like that. And that always feels like we've talked about Stranger Things on here quite a bit. And I know Sarah's not watched Stranger Things, and I really like Stranger Things. And it explores that idea of friendship groups and the group as the kind of nexus of what's successful about the D&D game. That's core to the whole kind of idea of the story arc of Stranger Things. But for me, that's one part. The other part, you talked about voices. I did drama. I did A-level theatre studies. And at the very end of A-level theatre studies, I was like, thank God I will never have to do any of that again. And I won't have to come up with things on the spot and I won't have to be overly... And then I became a teacher and you're doing it all the time. And kind of the idea of kind of interpretation and come up with things and doing the voices and everything else.
You don't have to do the voices.
No, I get that. This is me completely outside of my comfort zone at the moment. So those are all the things that are going on in my head in terms of just don't know if I would feel completely outside of my comfort zone. I guess.
I mean, there's a few things, really important things you touched on there. I think one of the things, first of all, is there is a comfort zone thing. Absolutely. My wife said things. I would say she's more extroverted than me in some ways. Like, she loves the idea of, kind of, clubs and stuff like that and dancing. Dancing makes me very, very nervous. My introvert absolutely goes on. But the idea of doing voices and improv scares her. She doesn't like. So we've all got extroverted and introverted in different ways. But I think it is important, some people, and this is what's known in the tabletop RPG scene as the Matt Mercer effect. Matt Mercer being the dungeon master for the very, very successful show Critical Role, which has now got like animated shows on Amazon Prime and stuff like that. They are all professional voice actors. That is what they do. It's what they train to do. They've been doing it for years. So them doing voices and playing characters comes incredibly naturally to them. And there's a lot of people who think that therefore to play a game like that, you need to be able to do an awful lot of voices and do a lot of stuff like that. And you really don't. I mean, I think I'll give a really simplistic example. And you sort of see this transition a little bit. And I would say, Sarah, watch out for this next time we play, because some people role play their character in the third person and some people do it in the first person. Yes. So some people, let's say your character is called Frank the Barbarian. Some people will go, Frank's going to walk over there and check for traps, or Frank's going to go over there and hit them with his giant fish. Some people will go, I'm going to go over there and do that. And the second people start slightly inhabiting their character more, you can tell they've got a little bit more comfortable. And the same will be true with conversation. If it's like, well, actually, there's this, shady merchant and you want to try and find out some information. Some people go, can I go over there and talk to him about, what's happened, about the mugging that happened down the street or the dragon that flew by? And the dungeon master will go, yeah, roll a persuasion check. Ah, yeah, you rolled really high. Yeah, he tells you about X, Y, and Z. And that's kind of detached and third person, and it's a bit more strategic. It's equivalent of going, I'm going to move my bishop to this square. You're saying what you want to happen, but you're not really inhabiting it. And then once people get more comfortable, and it is kind of part of the dungeon master's role to kind of only do what the players are comfortable doing, is then actually turning that into an improvised conversation where someone actually goes, right, mate, what's going on here? There was a dragon over there, and then they do their own character talking about, and whether it's in voices or not, it's entirely up to them. But you can do it in a very sort of slightly detached, more strategic way. And so, you don't have to dive straight in. But what I will say here, and I'm going to say this on camera, and you better include this. In fact, this doesn't have to be homework for this week, but I'm going to make the offer to the pair of you that I will run a game of, it can be full Dungeons and Dragons, it can be Little But Fierce if you'd like something less crunchy on rules, and I'll run it for the pair of you. So it won't be a big old group. It can be the pair of you as, whether, a dynamic duo. My brain's now gone to Only Fools and Horses, Batman and Robin. But, the pair of you being a party together, doing an adventure, and we can pitch it whatever you like. It's a really important thing, and I think this is it's a D&D role-playing thing, but also it is, I think, a kind of important educational tool here is we'll do kind of what we refer to as a session zero. So we'll talk through, what do you want this experience to be? What sort of genre do you want it to be? As in, what kind of films would it be like? And where are your lines and veils? What are the things you want this to be? And what are the things you categorically do not want this to be? What are the things you definitely don't want to happen in this? So we can
and it's what we talk
set up a scene that everyone's going to have fun.
Okay. Challenge accepted. Can I one-up it?
Yes.
It's got serious.
I think we should also record it and use it as content on the channel, given that that's now what we do.
I'm absolutely game for that. Absolutely.
And again, it's for me, it's about being outside. I'm getting into the idea of trying new things, getting outside of my comfort zone a little bit more. And I guess it's because the day job I do is so challenging and is so draining that at the moment, I'm just throwing myself into some of these things and just going, let's do it. Let's just do it. Why not? Let's just do it. But if yes, I'm absolutely up for that.
We'll do it then.
I think one of the nice things about all of this, and it's I think most people who have a go at this, they'll either go, it was kind of fun, but I'm not sure it's my thing, or they kind of dive in because they realize that as adults, we don't give ourselves a license to play make-believe anymore. As kids, we'll do it and won't give it a second's thought. But as adults, that notion of, well, this is a safe space for creative play and we can be silly around our friends is lovely and incredibly freeing.
I think sometimes we can be so serious with so today I've had a really tough day at work, and not necessarily things I can talk about in terms of a podcast. And actually I've done it before where when I went to Uganda, I went to an orphanage and I cried loads. But then we role played in the evening, and it was time to just be like not having any real consequence. And it was just a moment. And that's what's great about Little But Fierce as well, is that there's no deaths, is there? And things like that.
No.
It's that kind of sanitized version of a world that, and as an adult, you can deal with those themes in more kind of sensible ways. But yeah, it's sometimes just nice to play as an adult, because you don't often get the opportunity. And if you've got a job there is a lot of responsibility and is, lots of deadlines and competing priorities, to just go, actually, and this is what we do every other week. We go from 7 till 9:30-ish, 9 o'clock-ish. We're just silly and we just talk to each other, and we're not serious. And it doesn't matter if we make mistakes. I mean, I did like the way that Dave spoke about, we go over and we talk about this. Actually, what happens is we look at a door for half an hour and we talk about looking at a door. That's actually what happens in role playing more often than not. And it's, we split the party and people go and do different things. But you don't need to be good at it, in inverted commas. You just need to be present in it. I think that's the big thing, is just being present in the game.
I think it's exactly that. As long as you're listening and chipping in where you can, and I would say to use stuff like that, and yes and. So as long as you're taking what's been thrown at you, adding a thing to it and going with it, rather than just shutting it down and going, no, I'm not doing that, or you've made a really interesting thing, I'm going to kill him. As long as you're not shutting down other people's fun, it's all good. There's no way to do it wrong.
It's quite nice as well to have met people that I wouldn't have otherwise met as well. I think that's lovely. So, there is no way that James Hanscom and I would have ever associated otherwise. Like, why would I have? There's just no way. Or yourself, Dave. It is unlikely that our paths would have crossed, and David Didow and the rest of the groups, actually, probably not. It's nice to just have that, because you don't, like, making friends when you're older is when, you've got to go out and do things. It's a bit weirder making friends with people as an adult.
I've had this conversation with people recently, and every so often it does around the various memes you see about it, especially because, I don't know when the word networking appeared in the context it is now, but networking is a thing that we all have to do. We go to events and, with networking dinners that you may not attend to record a podcast. But it's the equivalent of making friends, except there's always this veil of professionalism around it, and, I'll add you on LinkedIn afterwards and stuff like that. But actually, it's quite nice to be able to go, I quite like you. You're fun to be around. Do you want to? Do you want to play a game or go to the pub or whatever? Because we just don't do it as adults, And it's actually quite nice to just reach out. And I can't remember who originally said it. It said, just send someone a message saying, do you want to hang out sometime? Because we never do. We're all so nervous.
I mean, that is a weird thing to do, though, isn't it? Like, I think I did that with David Didow, going, I'm in Bristol, do you want to go out for lunch? And I think he was like, all right. And I think I did that with you as well, didn't I? Going, can I pop round? And just like, why not?
But we talked about this just a minute ago, and you talked about it. It's like, I'm halfway to somewhere, I need to go to the toilet. We've kind of lost that art of just being able to just go to your friend's house. I remember when I was a child, we lived on a street, and we were in and out of people's houses all the time, and front doors were always open. And we've kind of lost that a little bit. And even in friendship, even close friendships, I mean, it's actually taken Sarah for me to realise you can still do that as an adult with a family and everything else, and it not be weird. Every time I go to Kent, the message will be, well, are you dropping in on the way past? Just come in and have a coffee. And, stop off to have a coffee, have a wee, and then get back on the road. And that's great. But it takes individuals to kind of be that way and break down those barriers and start those things off.
I think it's nice, like, I see friendships as opportunities, and I don't mean that in a kind of transactional way, but actually, like, you don't know where friendships go. And I think I've made some lovely friends, and like, who I really kind of adore in lots of different ways. But also it's really nice. Like, I know if I go to Sheffield, well, Matt, I think, lives near Sheffield. That's great. I get confused with geography. Do you want to come meet me? And
Sarah's particularly bad at geography. She'll often say, I'm going somewhere. It's near you, isn't it? And then message me the place she's going, and I'll say, well, no, it's the other side of the country, but, okay.
Other than that small flaw.
And so I'm good. I'm really good at Essex and Kent, because that's my stomping ground, obviously, by my accent. And then anything else thereof. But, I just get confused with geography. Up north is anything from the Midlands and beyond.
Yeah. I think we need to transition a little bit to education, because this is both a geek and education podcast. However, I think because Dave's here, a good thing might be to talk about Edtech and some of those things, which will be right up his street as they are up ours as well, particularly because I am at a convention conference these 2 days, where the big flavour around all of those businesses are here is AI and EdTech. In fact, what's really interesting about this event is there are 4 or 5 companies all doing the same thing, all competing for the same business at an event which is only maybe 250 delegates. And what they are, a lot of what these particular AI organizations are doing, these companies are doing, is offering it's offering a service to teachers which is about reducing workload by doing the marking for teachers, whether that be in maths, whether that be writing. So there are at least 4 companies here today where your children write onto a piece of paper. That piece of paper is scanned into a system, and then that AI system marks and moderates the writing. And what's really interesting about it, I'll come for your thoughts in a minute, Dave. What's really interesting about it, as I've looked at it, one of the things that I have flagged with all of them is, whilst I understand that these things are very much still in their infancy, one of the things that they are missing is the nuances. They're thinking towards the individuality of children, SEND needs, children in alternative provision, where the descriptors you've got for Key Stage 2 or for Year 11 might be great, but in alternative provision, you've got these big gaps of time often, which leads to gaps in learning, which means that the children aren't necessarily going to be working in an age-expected way. And I've raised that with all of them over the course of today, because what I've said to them is, the company here that comes out of this on top is the company who does exactly that, is the one who leads the way in terms of doing more for more children, because the big theme for this conference has been closing the disadvantaged gap. And unless they're thinking about individual children rather than about the system itself, they're not going to close the disadvantaged gap. They're going to create, these are fantastic pieces of AI. They really are. The systems themselves are incredible. The tools, what they can do for workload for teachers is amazing. But ultimately, they're only going to work for a small cohort of pupils.
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot there. I Sarah will know this because I recently was very kindly invited to be on a Pruzap talk related to AI. I have very strong feelings on AI related to how it's used. It is an incredible technology, and there are definitely some very important uses of it. But I think certainly in the last few years, we've all been bombarded by it, and there are definitely people out there who will say that, put AI in everything, which one is completely inappropriate. And secondly, AI means an awful lot of things. Analytically, it's very powerful. Generative AI, there is a big old can of worms there's an awful lot to that one. And some people just kind of blanketly say, well, AI is just AI, isn't it? Just chuck it at everything. I mean, the marking one's really interesting. And I think there's a number of strands to this. I mean, I spent a long time being involved in the marking and assessment world. There is a huge amount of reluctance from awarding bodies to use AIs. Now, some of that is a result of what happened during lockdown with exams and moving to that. I know I was working for the SQA up in Scotland, Scottish Qualification Authority, who had recently been rebranded at the time. And Scotland, because Scotland take their exams first before England, they got hit by the press hardest about this. And the word algorithm became a dirty word, despite the fact what they did was actually, absolutely the best way of using the information you had to draw a reasonable conclusion and try and be fair to give the kids the best results. Anything that's a bit more subjective, there is a huge amount to it. And it can be a very useful tool to assist in marking, to target, you maybe want to look at this, have a look at these ones, but just replacing entirely makes me nervous. And it makes me nervous largely because it becomes marking for marking's sake. Back when I was teaching, I tried to make sure, I've seen a lot in my time, and I'm sure both of you seen the same, of ridiculous marking policies from schools that seem to be, You've got to mark this often, and you've got to do it in 3 different colours of pen, and you've got to do it like that, and you ask someone why.
Scrutinise whether or not you've done that, and it'll be another cosh.
Yeah. I'll actually say, not just experience it, but probably being guilty of creating and implementing those policies as well.
Easy to go down that route, and as long as you're open to the challenge of why are we doing it, what do we get out of it, what do they get out of it, and can have a conversation, they can absolutely be the right thing. I think things like peer assessment are great, self-assessment's great, but if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, and I've seen that where it's like you must have a peer assessment task every lesson, it's not appropriate for every lesson. So I would say when you can do really good formative assessment, sometimes you've got to chuck a mark on it, sometimes you've got to chuck a grade on it. We know that's how the exam system works. But in my mind, marking should always be about how do you support the kid to learn the next thing. And I was actually at a talk at Research Ed a while back, and Sarah was there, and that discussion came up. There was some people in the room who were kind of the AI bros, who were like, oh, just chuck it at Copilot. They can do that, can auto-mark that. And say, yeah, it can, and it'll probably be quite accurate. But what do you get out of it, and what do the kids get out of it? Because in my mind, marking is useful to go, they don't understand equivalent fractions. I've seen a load of stuff here, and they're struggling with equivalent fractions. So I'm going to provide a bit of support. I always like the idea of challenge questions. I'll set them some questions that help guide them in and let them practice those skills a little bit. But if you're not the person doing the marking and making those little observations on, they're good at this, they're bad at that. Ooh, I'm seeing a repeated misconception that's going on here. If you're not doing it and just worrying about what's the end mark, what's the summative mark, how many did they get out of 10, what percentage did they get, what band are they in, if that's just doing it for assessment's sake rather than being a constructive formative tool, it's kind of pointless. And given how resource intensive AI is, if it's just to get a mark out of the end, you are boiling a lot of water for not really that much benefit for the kid. You are saving workload, but the question has to be, why are you doing the marking?
So I'm glad you said that. I don't mind sort of naming the particular programs or applications within here, but there's one which is really up and coming, which is Magma Maths. And what it does is that it really requires the young person to put in the work and out. It's not really interested too much in the answer. It's more about how the child got to that answer, and that's really important. And what it does is it requires the member of staff to still do the thinking, to still set up the task, to set up everything. But it does also link out into resource banks and content that, for White Rose Maths and some of those other schemas. But what it will do is, when the child gets it right or wrong, it then offers advice and support. But then as a teacher, you can see how every child did in that particular task, the same question. You can then see every single child's screen on your dashboard. You can anonymize, so you take the children's name away, and then you can pick out the ones where the children, for example, might not have got that right, and then you can use what they've done to remodel yourself. So it then comes back to that whole idea. It's not about outcomes, it is about the process and remodeling and scaffolding to make sure that children can do that. There's another one today. There's an organization called Stylus, which is writing, and what they've actually done is they have got teachers moderating the work that's coming in. So when the AI looks at it, and this is all formative, so they're not looking at a score, but they're looking at best fit and to what extent can most. I think there's things like they mostly use nouns in the correct way. Well, mostly is massively subjective, and so there is a bit of a heat map in terms of how far mostly goes. But one of the key things they're looking at is to what extent are they creating accurate sentences and sentence structures. But what he talked about is, the way that they're modeling it is that if the AI gets it right, then they feed that back into the rules. But if the AI gets it wrong, because there are teachers marking this at the same time, the AI is then modified in order to show how it got it wrong. So they are moderating the work along with the AI to build the so they're not relying on some of those very formulaic systems there. What I think the way that Dominic refers to it is AI slop, getting away from the AI slop of things like ChatGPT and really creating AI models that are specific and really honed down to the thing that you are trying to do.
What you described there is really important in terms of the intellectual property of that. There are so many AI models out there that are trained, regardless of what it's for, whether it's generative or not, that are trained on copyright material. So that actually inherently there is a giant copyright issue, and that's something that's actually going around right now. In fact, I think in the last day or so, at the time of recording, I think there's a big worry that the UK Parliament is maybe not going to put some exceptions in related to copyright and AI, but actually in America, and yay for the basically one time only. For the American Supreme Court, sorry, got very political there for a second, actually said they're not going to rule on a particular case because the general result is that you can't copyright generative AI works in America. That's kind of been the decision that's come out of it. So there's a huge AI issue there. So that actually, if you've got the buy-in and it's part of the contracts, that the moderating teachers, the markers there, are actually this is where the training comes from, rather than just we're scouring the internet and we're stealing a load of stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
To train the model. That's actually ethically an awful lot better, from that IP perspective.
And there was two comments that really resonated with me today. There was somebody who was talking about how they have practically implemented that and the success and all of the impact that they've had. But fundamentally, they also talked about their kind of product cycle in terms of if we're going to use AI, these are the stages we're going to go through. And there were two really great kind of comments that were made. When they look at the selection of a tool to do anything in the delivery or the marking or the assessment, there's two fundamentals, and they are: number one, if it replaces teacher thinking, we won't use it. And then number two, if it leaves anybody behind, we won't use it. And I think the first one is kind of, makes a lot of sense. The second one, though, that's about recognizing your workforce. And I think that's one of the problems that we have with some. We've always had it with some ed tech. We have a similar problem, which is not just the workforce, but also the technology within the schools, which is why Stylus is a paper-based system. It's paper-based, so you get printed lines that you write onto as a pupil, and that is scanned in. They don't use a technological interface to put the information in. One, because it just isn't, writing onto a screen just isn't the same as writing onto a piece of paper, and probably degrades the quality of what goes in. But they work on a paper-based system because they recognize that the technology just isn't in schools, because it's one of the things that not all schools can afford.
Yeah, absolutely. Second, meaningful conversations started happening about moving towards digital exams, especially for national qualification. That was immediately the question about digital divide. You're saying that every single, say, year 11 student is going to have to sit their English exam on a computer. Have you got enough machines for that? And how's that going to work?
Yeah.
And the second you start hitting issues like that, there is a very real chance that the private schools or the bigger mats where they can maybe move money around to make that possible, they'll be in a better situation than, people from, less affluent areas, schools with not as much money. And that's a huge, huge risk for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to Kazakhstan to talk about AI. Just thought I'd just throw that in there.
Very good. Do you know what specifically you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the use of AI for adaptive teaching as an inclusion tool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So looking specifically around special needs.
I'm actually doing my master's on AI and on whether or not, this isn't the actual title, title, I'm sure I've told you this. The actual title is more kind of sophisticated than this, but it's whether or not AI can actually be used by primary school teachers as a tool to reduce workload.
Okay.
And increase retention. But what the evidence shows, in fact, the evidence base is very limited, which is why it's good to do as a study.
Absolutely.
But because the evidence base is really limited, what the evidence base actually shows is that it is possible to reduce workload. There's no real kind of strength to the argument that the tools we use in education do reduce workload. There is a reluctance in schools to use AI because some people think it's cheating. Most people who use AI do it behind their kind of line manager's back because they don't think they're allowed to. Most teachers are self-trained in AI. So actually the strategy just isn't there for you to ever really look where the impact is. What I'm trying to get is whether or not it actually affects retention. And the problem is there's no evidence that actually says any use of AI reduces workload in education. There's evidence of it in industry, but not necessarily in education.
And that's what I think. I think general industry is a lot more forward thinking around AI and have embraced it more. I think education as an industry, as a sector, is more reluctant because I think the reasons that you've said around the kind of efficacy around it's been seen as cheating, not real knowledge, that it's replacing teachers and those kind of concerns, I think. And I think it's interesting that I think there's different kind of camps around AI where some people really embrace it and use it a lot in their kind of their general workflows, and for others actually really reluctant. But again, that idea, it's really difficult to get good training on the topic of AI. So that's why it was really great that Dave come on to approve that webinar where we had industry experts talking about it, but as well as people in education talking about it. And it wasn't trying to sell AI. It was, these are the ways that you could use it. These are some of the kind of checks and balances and governance and accountability that you need to have as well.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely one of those things. If there was one thing that I would really like to see happen with AI in education in this next year, is there needs to be easily available training for this. Even if it's a train the trainer model where, right, a representative from each school goes and does a course and then passes that on. That's great. But there's so much hearsay. There's so much self-training. There's so much, bad practice that people don't even realize is bad practice. And also things like the ethical side of it, making sure you're using this technology wisely and also making sure that we're safe on it. I have no doubt that there are countless teachers out there putting pupil information into publicly available tools like ChatGPT. Yeah. I guarantee it's happening. And they don't even realize that's a problem.
Yeah. There's an ethical minefield that I think people don't even realize.
No. It's known unknowns and stuff like that. They don't even realize it's a thing they need to be considering, despite the fact they're probably doing best practice with, or they're not going to leave, class photos on a train or something. They definitely know not to do that, but they don't realize that something else is actually a problem. So I think training and also support so that schools can have AI policies, so people actually know what they can and can't do and why critically. And those sorts of policies have to be written from a place of being informed, not either a very enthusiastic person who wants to push AI into everything, or someone who thinks it's the devil's work and therefore must be banned outright. It's a tool. It's a strategic tool.
That's it. And there's a happy medium there as well. And I think you're right. It is a strategic tool that has practical benefits. And I think people should be supported in how to use it in a way that is safe, reliable, and ethical.
And then people will probably use it better and will get better outcomes from using it. And in turn, as is the case with AI, it itself will then be a better platform or various better platforms to use, because it's all about the learning from each other.
Thank you, Dave, so much for coming on the show and sharing that little but fierce. It has been a delight to have you on.
Thank you so much. No, genuinely, it's been a pleasure.
Our first guest on the show, and there'll be more to follow. And I'm sure Dave will have you back as well, because in a second we'll come back to your Kickstarter, but it'd be great to find out how that goes. So can you tell us how long is it open for? And we'll obviously put the link below in the comments as well, so that people can access it directly.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so it's running throughout the entire of March. Yeah, we kicked off on the 3rd. It's 28 days and literally runs to the end of the month. And if you're listening to this or watching it and going, that sounds interesting, please look at it sooner rather than later. Algorithms being what they are, we need to get to our main funding goal, and then Kickstarter's algorithm keeps promoting it and promoting it and promoting it, and then we can make it better and better and better. So don't leave it to the 11th hour, and you only get charged at the end. If you're thinking, I want to wait till payday, it doesn't matter. You only get charged at the very, very end. So if it sounds interesting, have a look. Just Google Little But Fierce Kickstarter. You'll find it. And there is a link somewhere around here.
Yeah, we'll make sure that's tagged into the bottom of the comments on YouTube. So thanks very much, Dave. It's been brilliant having you with us. Humorous, insightful, absolutely superb. No doubt we'll want you back sometime again in the future. Thank you. But for now,
I'm Sarah Johnson.
And I'm Matt Morris. And we have nothing
to bring.